Congress will have a lot to deal with when lawmakers return from their summer recess. Gun control at the top of the Democrats' agenda. There's also, obviously, immigration reform, and everyone is keeping an eye on Hong Kong, North Korea, and Iran. Tonight, we have a lot to talk about with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California. He is on a trip to Israel. Mr. Leader, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
First, let's start on your trip, what you're taking from it and what you're doing there.
Well, I brought 31 of the Republican members over, and we're walking through Israel, our greatest ally in the Middle East, the only country in the Middle East that is a democracy. We met with the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. We met with the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. We're up at the border of Lebanon today looking at Hezbollah's tunnels that they have recently discovered coming across over into Israel. It gives you a very clear understanding of the challenges for a peace process here, but it's a way that a lot of the new freshmen can see it on the ground, and we actually made it bipartisan. Steny Hoyer and I made sure the Democrats and Republicans came together for a number of days here in Israel to look at the challenges together and understand how do we maintain this bond and even grow it to a future generation.
Now, you say this is bipartisan, yet on this trip you've also expressed your concerns about the squad, the freshman Democrats, who you say are taking the Democratic Party away from Israel. Explain that.
Well, if you look at it, they did not come on the trip with their colleagues. Secondly, if you look at the anti-Semitism that has been growing around the world, we haven't seen something like this since the 1930s, and the actions that they have taken in Congress itself. Whereas the Senate passed S1, it's the anti-BDS. It's the stopping of the boycott, divestiture, and sanctions against Israel. Well, that bill passed the Senate overwhelmingly. Chuck Schumer not only voted for it, he co-sponsored it. But when it came to the House, they couldn't pass the bill. They moved a resolution, and much of that was to do about this new movement of this new socialist Democrat. And look at what Bernie Sanders, look at Kamala Harris wouldn't even go to the AIPAC meeting this year inside Washington. Unheard of in the process of what's been going forward. There's a number of Democrats that still stand with Israel, but this new socialist Democrat group has a much different belief.
You know, Axios is reporting that the president told American advisors, including senior administration officials, that Congresswoman Omar and Tlaib should be barred from going to Israel. The administration's not commenting. Israel is not barring them. But any thought on that? Do you think the president had those beliefs?
I've never heard the president say that to me. But the one thing that should have happened, they should have come with their colleagues. They should have come together where they could have a meeting with Israel, with the Palestinian Authority, with those who were running against Bibi at the same time. You would get every view that you wanted to see. As long as you come with an open mind, open eyes, and open ears, I think you have a responsibility to come here to have an understanding.
All right, let's talk about the other issues of the day that are pressing. The House Speaker is calling for action on gun control legislation. Take a listen.
We must pass gun violence prevention legislation. Every day we lose lives, and now public sentiment must weigh in to save lives, to pass our bill, and to look at high-capacity magazines that should be eliminated as well.
That bill did pass the House. 8 Republicans voted for it. You voted no on this background check bill that included other things. It's now sitting in the Senate. What do you think the Senate should do?
Well, I think the Senate should actually pass a bill that actually works. And you got to understand what has this last Congress done. When we saw a shooting like in Parkland, where that individual, and we never want to say his name, the FBI was warned not once but twice, months ahead of time, and no action was taken. Or we saw that shooting in Texas at a church. What happened there was the National Instant Criminal Background Check failed. And it was our own military that no longer gave the information forward, so we changed that. We did a fix nix in that process, and when you look at the bump stock that came through during the Obama administration, the Trump administration took that back. We would actually like to see something that works in this process, and we're willing to work with anybody. We want to make sure we protect our due process, but we also want to make sure we protect the Americans across for who should have this.
All right. Well, the president
weapons as well.
The president said he wants to see meaningful background checks on Tuesday. He said he thinks that Mitch McConnell wants something to happen. You voted against that bill in the House. Do you think something will happen on this issue?
because that bill does not give you meaningful background checks. You could write a bill that actually does that, and I'm more than willing to sit down with anyone and work on that. And I've reached out to Mitch as well, McConnell, to find a way that we can work on that. I've spoken to the president numerous times. We want a process that works. We also want a process that we have we have laws today that aren't enforced. The number of people who try to buy a weapon who are not legally have the right to do it, less than 8% of those are even prosecuted today.
I want to go through a couple of issues very quickly. One is your concern about what's happening in Hong Kong and what potentially the U.S. could or could not do about it.
Well, I think, first of all, America should stand with those who believe in freedom. It's a fundamental part of our country. America is more than a country. We are an idea of self-governance. Remember, this is the 30-year anniversary of Tiananmen Square. That was a defining moment when we watched those tanks roll in, to the millions of people who stood up and built a statue like the Statue of Liberty just for the idea of freedom of speech. And what's happening in China today, every single person in China gets a social score. They're denied whether they could fly on a plane if they don't speak the way the government wants them to. Inside Hong Kong, with those who are standing for freedom, I want them to know that America stands with you, the same as we stand with the shipyard workers in Poland in the 80s, the same reason that we stand with those in Venezuela that crave freedom as well.
All right, quickly, the president is appearing to back off plans to commute the sentence of former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. Is that from a push from House Republicans?
I'm not sure exactly where, and I know the president never said he was. He was actually analyzing it. I don't think the president should release the former governor. You know, I think it's 4 out of 5 of the last governors of Illinois have been in jail, and they've been in jail because they stood before and they had a jury of their peers make a decision. I think they should serve their time, and I think that's correct if the president makes that decision to make him continue to serve his time.
The southern border issue, Democrats expressing concern about eminent domain, saying we're troubled by the lack of transparency, particularly concerned that given landowners whose property was seized during prior border barrier construction efforts have told Congress they did not receive just compensation for their land. They'd like to know what's happening this time with the efforts to build a border wall.
They can see all they want, but the Democrats aren't concerned about that. They're more concerned about having open borders. I've never understood a situation where when you see a crisis, even the New York Times has written an editorial, not once but twice, about the crisis along our southern border. But has there been any hearings in judiciary about this? Has there been any action? And now that the Democrats are concerned about eminent domain or private property, I think that's far, far from it, because I haven't seen them care about that before. All they are more concerned about is having an open border system, which is not. We want to have a legal immigration system, and we want one that actually works.
Last thing, your colleague, Representative Steve King, was talking to a conservative club Wednesday, and he said that humanity might not exist at all if not for rape and incest throughout human history. If you pulled out a product of rape or incest, would there be any population of the world left if we did that? You have any problem with that construction?
I have a great deal of problems with that. This isn't the first time I've had concerns with what Steve King has said. Earlier in this Congress, there are things that Steve King said that I do not believe the party of Lincoln would stand for. And as a united conference, we actually removed Steve King from his committees inside Congress. And I think this just continues to show why that action was taken.
Well, Mr. Leader, we appreciate your time. Safe travels on your trip.